Let me begin by quoting a man that I quote virtually in one form or the other in every talk I give because he had a profound impact on my life. I had the privilege of meeting Malcolm Muggeridge just about 7 months before he died in his home in England. It was a dream come true for me. One of the things Muggeridge said in the 70s was this: it is difficult to resist the conclusion that 20th century man has decided to abolish himself. Tired of the struggle to be himself, he has created boredom out of his own affluence, impotence out of his own erotomania, and vulnerability out of his own strength. He himself blows the trumpet that brings the walls of his own cities crashing down until at last, having educated himself into imbecility, having drugged and polluted himself into stupefaction, he keels over a weary, battered old brontosaurus and becomes extinct. That's over 40 years ago. How he's created boredom out of his own affluence, impotence out of his erotomania, vulnerability out of his strength. He blows the trumpet that brings the walls of his own cities crashing down. And that winning line of all, having educated himself into imbecility. Because the fact is that there is nothing so vulgar left in our human experience for which you cannot find some professor from somewhere to justify it. That's precisely what has happened. You see, there are three kinds of cultures. A theonomous culture, where God's law is considered in the heart of people. It used to be something like natural law. Heteronymous culture, where a handful dictate to the masses. Iran is a heteronymous culture religiously. China is a heteronymous culture in secular terms. Theonomous, God's law is in the heart of humanity, and we live by that natural law. Heteronymous, where a handful from the top dictate to the many. America is neither of those now. So what do we call ourselves? An autonomous culture. Autos meaning self, nomos meaning law, which means we are a law unto ourselves individually. Fair enough. But when I speak at university campuses and I'm asked a deliberately leading question on my view on something, I tell them there's a theonomous culture, a heteronymous culture, and an autonomous culture. What kind of culture are we in? They'll always say autonomous. I say, all right, so you mean I'm given the privilege of a self-law, right? If I give you my view, will you accept it, or will you suddenly switch to an heteronymous stance and condemn me for giving my view on my opinion of right and wrong? You see, you go back to the book of Genesis. There's only one prohibition. Do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Just one prohibition. Because the day you do that, you shall be as God, knowing good and evil. What does that mean? You'll begin to play God, defining good and evil. Now do you see the number of laws we need just for our health care program? One paragraph here from G.K. Chesterton that I think is fascinating. Nothing sublimely artistic has ever arisen out of mere art, any more than anything essentially reasonable has ever arisen out of pure reason. There must always be a rich moral soil for any great aesthetic growth. There must always be a rich moral soil for any great aesthetic growth. And Dr. Prager and I have that same burden to bring that moral soil back into our culture, because when truth is planted into a moral soil, it'll sprout and bring forth the right kind of fruit.